She came seeking only a position, never imagining she would uncover a secret capable of changing two noble families forever.
The North Yorkshire road climbed through fog so thick that Ravenscliffe Hall did not so much appear as materialize, stone by grey stone, out of the mist. First the twin gatehouse towers, then the long avenue of bare elms, then the house itself, vast and dark-windowed under a sky the colour of old pewter. Miss Cassandra Wren pressed her gloved hand flat against the carriage window and told herself, for the 100th time since Leeds, that she was not afraid. She was 24 years old, in possession of excellent references, a working knowledge of French, Italian, and the pianoforte, and precisely £11 to her name. She was not afraid of a house, however large, nor of a duke, however exalted. She had buried a father in disgrace, nursed a mother through a final winter with no fire to speak of, and taught the alphabet to farmers' children for 4 shillings a week before Mrs. Prouder's agency had found her this post. She had survived worse than a long carriage ride into Yorkshire. She was not afraid. She simply could not stop her hands from trembling. The carriage rolled beneath the gatehouse arch, and the coachman's voice called down something she didn't catch, and then they were rattling up the avenue proper, and Cassandra caught her first full sight of Ravenscliffe Hall. 3 stories of dark millstone grit, mullioned windows catching the last grey light. A house that looked as though it had grown out of the moor itself rather than been built upon it. Only a house, she told herself. Only a position. You are Cassandra Wren, governess, and nothing more. It was, of course, a lie. But it was the lie she had built her whole new life upon, and she had grown practiced at telling it to herself. She was received not by a footman, but by the housekeeper herself, a spare, silver-haired woman with sharp eyes, and a black bombazine dress so correct it might have been armour. Miss Wren. The housekeeper looked her over, not unkindly, but thoroughly, the way one might examine a horse before purchase. I am Mrs. Whitfield. His Grace is from home until this evening. You'll want to see the schoolroom and meet Lady Sophia before supper. Thank you, Mrs. Whitfield. Something flickered across the older woman's face. There and gone so quickly Cassandra might have imagined it, as Cassandra gave her name. A tightening about the eyes. A held breath. Wren, Mrs. Whitfield repeated very quietly, as though testing the word. Forgive me, it is an unusual name in these parts. I believe it is common enough in Kent, where I was raised, Cassandra said, which was true, and said nothing else, which was also, in its way, true. Mrs. Whitfield did not press further, but as she turned to lead the way up the wide oak staircase, Cassandra saw her glance back once, swift, searching, before her composure resettled like water closing over a dropped stone. Lady Sophia Hale was 9 years old, fierce-eyed, ink-stained at the fingers, and entirely unimpressed by governesses. The last one cried, she informed Cassandra by way of introduction, and the one before that told Papa I was unteachable, and the one before that fell in love with the curate and left to marry him, which I thought was very stupid, because the curate has a lisp. I have no intention of crying, Cassandra said, setting down her single travelling case. And I promise you, I have never once fallen in love with a curate. Something like respect crossed the child's face. Do you know Latin? I know a great deal of Latin. Do you? No, nobody will teach me. Papa says young ladies need only French and drawing and playing the pianoforte badly enough to be modest about it. Cassandra felt the corner of her mouth lift despite herself. Your papa is wrong. We shall begin with Latin on Thursday. For the first time, Lady Sophia smiled. A real smile, gap-toothed and delighted. transforming her small, solemn face entirely. "I think," she said, "that I shall like you." It was, Cassandra would later think, the first true and unguarded moment of joy she had felt in over a year. She did not meet the Duke of Ashworth until well past 9 that evening, and the meeting was not by any means what she had prepared herself for. She had gone down against strict propriety, but Lady Sophia had left her sketchbook in the library and begged so piteously that Cassandra had relented. Into the great dark room lined floor to ceiling with books, candlelight pooling gold across leather spines, and had not seen, until she was 3 steps into the room, that it was already occupied. He was standing at the far window with his back to her, coat discarded over a chair, cravat loosened, a glass of something amber untouched on the sill beside him. He was looking out at nothing, at the black moor and the blacker sky, with the particular stillness of a man who believed himself entirely alone. Cassandra froze, but it was too late. The floor creaked beneath her, and he turned. For one unguarded instant, before either of them remembered who they were meant to be to one another, they simply looked at each other. He was younger than she had expected, perhaps 32, and less remote-looking than his title had led her to imagine, though there was something carved and weary about his face, a tiredness that sat oddly on a man otherwise so obviously, unfairly handsome. Dark hair disordered as though he'd dragged a hand through it more than once. Grey eyes that found hers and did not, for a long moment, look away. "You must be the new governess," he said at last. His voice was low, courteous, faintly amused despite the shadows beneath his eyes. "Wren, is it not?" "Yes, Your Grace." She dropped a curtsy, cheeks warming, furious with herself for it. "I beg your pardon. Lady Sophia's sketchbook. I did not know the library was occupied." "It generally isn't at this hour by anyone but me." He gestured almost carelessly at the shelves. "You may fetch what you came for." She crossed to the window seat where the sketchbook lay, acutely conscious of him watching her the whole while. Not with impertinence, she thought, but with a kind of tired curiosity, as though she were a puzzle he hadn't the energy to solve tonight, but might, on some other evening, find himself unable to resist. "Sophia tells me," he said, as she straightened with the book in hand, "that you have promised her Latin." "I have, Your Grace. I hope that does not offend." "It does not offend, it astonishes." A ghost of a smile. "Every governess before you agreed with my mother that Latin would ruin her marriage prospects at the age of 9. You are the first to disagree with my mother about anything, on your first day, without being asked." "I did not realize disagreement was required to be scheduled, Your Grace." That surprised a real laugh out of him. Short, low, rusty, as though it were not an exercise he took often. "No," he said. "No, I don't suppose it is." Their eyes held a moment longer than was strictly proper. Then Cassandra, feeling the ground shift beneath her in some way she could not name and did not trust, dropped another curtsy and fled the room with Sophia's sketchbook clutched to her chest like a shield. Behind her, she did not see the Duke of Ashworth set down his untouched glass of brandy and stand a long while at the window, no longer looking at the moor at all. Have you ever had to hide who you really are just to survive somewhere new? You don't have to tell me the details. Just, has it ever been you? Comments are open, and I read every single one. The weeks that followed fell into a rhythm Cassandra had not expected to find comforting. Mornings in the schoolroom with Sophia, declining Latin nouns and arguing companionably over the globe. Afternoons walking the frost-hard gardens when the weather allowed. Evenings alone with her needlework and her secrets in the small chamber allotted to her under the eaves. She saw the Duke rarely and always briefly. At the far end of a corridor, across the breakfast room as she collected Sophia's tray, once astride a black hunter thundering back from the home farm with mud to his boot tops and colour in his face that made something in Cassandra's chest ache absurdly. Each time, something passed between them. A look held a beat too long, a courtesy extended with more warmth than duty required. And each time Cassandra reminded herself with increasing effort exactly what she was and what she was not permitted to want. She was a governess. He was a duke. The distance between them was not merely social, but arithmetic, as fixed and unbridgeable as the distance between the earth and the moon. And she had a secret that made the gulf wider still. It was in the third week, searching the library's lower shelves for a Latin primer suitable for a determined 9-year-old, that she found the letters. They had fallen, or been pushed, behind a loose panel at the base of an old glass-fronted cabinet, a small bundle tied with faded green ribbon, and she might never have found them at all had she not dropped her candle snuffer and knelt to retrieve it from the shadowed gap beneath. She should have left them. She knew this, even as her fingers closed around the ribbon. A well-bred governess who found another family's private correspondence hidden in a locked room would leave it exactly where it lay and mention it to no one. But the topmost letter, its ink faded to brown, bore a direction that stopped her heart entirely. To the Right Honourable the Earl of Rothermere, Wren House, Kent. Wren House. Her father's house before it was taken from him. Before the debts that were not truly his debts. Before the ruin that had killed her mother by inches and sent Cassandra out into the world under a name that was, in fact, entirely her own, and entirely hidden in plain sight, because no one expected the disgraced Earl of Rothermere, only daughter, to be foolish enough to keep it. With shaking hands, she untied the ribbon. My dear Rothermere, the first letter began in a hand she did not recognize, dated some 6 years past. The matter of the boundary dispute grows more pressing. Voss presses me daily to settle the Ashworth claim in his favour, and I confess I like the man less with each visit. I do not believe the documents he has produced are what he claims them to be. I would speak with you of this directly, and soon, before matters proceed further. The letter ended there, unfinished, or else its remainder lost. Voss. The current Earl of Rothermere's family name, the cousin who had inherited the title, and Wren House with it, upon the strength of debts and forged papers that her father, in his final broken years, had sworn to his dying day, were false. No one had believed him. No one but Cassandra, who had been 16 and powerless, and had watched her father buried in a country grave with his name unrestored. She read on, hands trembling, and the second letter, this one addressed astonishingly to her father from a correspondence signing only A.H., spoke of an Ashworth land claim disputed by your cousin V, of documents that cannot, upon close examination, be genuine, of an intention to bring the matter before Chancery once proof can be secured. A.H. Alexander Hale. The Duke of Ashworth's own father dead these 8 years, writing to her father about the very forgery that had ruined him, promising proof that had apparently never come. Cassandra sat back on her heels in the dark library, the letters clutched to her chest, and understood with dawning, dreadful clarity that she had not stumbled into this house by chance at all. Or rather, that chance had led her somewhere far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. The truth of her father's ruin, and the truth of some old dispute between the House of Ashworth and the House of Rothermere, were tangled together in ways she did not yet understand. And somewhere in this house, she was suddenly, coldly certain, someone knew exactly who she was. She had scarcely retied the ribbon and hidden the letters within the false lining of her workbox when a soft knock came at the schoolroom door, and Mrs. Whitfield's voice, carefully neutral, informed her that His Grace wished to see her in his study directly. The Duke's study was smaller than the library, warmer, more evidently lived in. Papers stacked with the particular disorder of a man who worked harder than his title strictly required, a fire banked low, the smell of leather and ink and, faintly, horse. He did not look this evening like a man about to dismiss a servant for impropriety. He looked, if anything, uncertain, an expression that sat as oddly on his composed features as the laugh had, weeks before. Miss Wren. He gestured her to a chair, which was itself irregular enough to alarm her. "Sit, please. I find I have a difficulty of a personal nature, and I find myself wanting your counsel on it, which I recognize is an unusual thing to ask of my daughter's governess." "I am at your service, Your Grace, though I cannot imagine what counsel I might offer that your own family could not." "My own family," he said with a dryness that surprised a small, unwilling smile from her, "is precisely the difficulty." He rubbed a hand across his jaw. "My mother has arranged, without troubling to consult me, a house party for the coming fortnight, to which she has invited half the county and, this is the difficulty, the Earl of Rothmere." The name struck Cassandra like cold water down the spine. She kept her face very still by main force of will. "She believes," the Duke went on, oblivious, pouring himself a brandy he did not drink, "that an alliance between our families would settle an old boundary dispute that has dragged on since my father's time, and that the surest means of settling it is a match between myself and Rothmere's ward, Miss Voss. I have no wish to marry Miss Voss. I have, in point of fact, no wish to marry Rothmere's family into mine at all, though I could not, until this evening, have told you precisely why the notion sits so ill with me." He looked up, and something in his grey eyes, tired and honest and entirely unguarded, made Cassandra's breath catch. "I begin to suspect," he said quietly, "that I have simply, foolishly, inconveniently, come to want something else instead." The silence that followed held far too much in it for a room shared by a duke and his daughter's governess. "Your Grace," Cassandra managed, it would not be proper for me to—" "No," he agreed low, "it would not be proper at all." He did not move toward her, did not overstep by so much as an inch. But neither did he look away, and neither, God help her, did she. "I find myself, Miss Wren, increasingly unconcerned with what is proper." She rose then, because she did not trust herself to remain seated a moment longer, curtsied with a correctness that felt almost violent in its formality, and fled the study with her heart hammering and the hidden letters seeming to burn through the false lining of her work-box 2 floors above. The Earl of Rothmere was coming to Ravenscliffe. The man who had stolen her father's name, her father's house, her father's very life, was coming here in a fortnight's time to a house where Cassandra Wren, governess, was already known by a name he would recognize the instant he laid eyes upon her. She did not sleep that night at all. The fortnight before the house party passed in a strange, suspended agony. Cassandra taught Sophia her declensions with a composure she did not feel, watched the guest wing being aired and dusted with a dread that sat like a stone beneath her ribs, and found herself, despite every resolution, unable to keep from seeking the Duke's company in the small, stolen hours when propriety allowed it. An evening reading in the library with the schoolroom door left properly open, a morning when he fell into step beside her on the frosted terrace, and did not, for once, seem in any hurry to be elsewhere. She told herself each time that it would be the last. Each time, It was not. It was a storm in the end that undid the last of her defences, a black Yorkshire storm blowing in off the moor with no warning at all, catching her and Sophia a full mile from the house on what should have been an ordinary botanical ramble. By the time they reached the old stone folly at the edge of the West Wood, rain was coming down in sheets and Sophia's teeth were chattering, and it was the Duke himself, riding out in search of them with his greatcoat already soaked through, who found them huddled in the folly's single dry corner and half carried his shivering daughter up before him onto his horse, leaving Cassandra to half run, half stumble alongside through mud and driving rain, until, impatient or perhaps simply unable to bear it, he reached down and pulled her up as well, so that the three of them rode back to Ravenscliffe, crowded together against the storm. Cassandra's back pressed to his chest, his arm a hard, warm bar across her waist, and neither of them said a single word about the fact that his heart, she could feel it, was beating very fast indeed. They delivered Sophia, dripping and delighted by the adventure, into Mrs. Whitfield's scandalized care. And then, somehow, Cassandra found herself alone with the Duke in the small, unused parlour off the side hall, both of them soaked through, a fire someone had hastily lit, crackling in the grate, and no earthly excuse remaining for either of them to leave. "You are shivering," he said. "So are you, Your Grace." "Alexander," he said, "when we are alone, which I'm aware we ought not to be, I find I cannot bear the Your Grace a moment longer." "That would be entirely improper." "Yes." He crossed the small distance between them, slowly, giving her every chance to step back, to protest, to flee as she had fled the study a fortnight before. She did none of these things. Cassandra. Her name in his voice for the first time. Low, careful, as though it were something precious he was afraid of breaking. "I have thought of very little else these 3 weeks, but I am aware of everything that stands between us, and I will not put you in a position that costs you your place, your reputation, your safety. Tell me to stop, and I will stop, and I will never speak of it again." Cassandra should have told him to stop. She thought of the letters hidden in her work-box. She thought of Rothmere arriving within the week, of the ruin that would follow if her name were known, of every reason, 100 reasons, 1,000. Why this man's hand should not be lifting to her rain-damp cheek, why she should not be leaning, however slightly, into the warmth of his palm. "I cannot tell you that," she whispered, "though I know I ought." He kissed her then, gently at first, a question more than a claim, and when she did not pull away, less gently, both of them soaked and cold and burning regardless, 3 weeks of unspoken longing finally given voice in the press of his mouth against hers. It was, Cassandra thought dimly, the single most reckless thing she had ever done in a life that had, until now, been built entirely upon caution. When at last they broke apart, foreheads resting together, both breathing hard, he murmured against her hair, "I do not know what I mean to do about any of this, but I know I am not sorry." Neither, God help her, was she. The Earl of Rothmere arrived 3 days later in a travelling carriage emblazoned with arms that had, until 11 years past, belonged to Cassandra's own family, and the sight of it turning up the avenue from the schoolroom window very nearly stopped her heart. She had prepared for this. She had told herself over and over in the small hours when sleep would not come. Keep to the schoolroom, keep to the nursery wing, give him no occasion to see your face. A governess's place was, after all, largely invisible to guests of quality. She might pass an entire fortnight without Rothmere so much as learning her name. She had not accounted for Sophia's delight in showing off her new Latin to anyone who would listen. nor for the Dowager Duchess's insistence, on the second evening of the party, that the charming young governess bring Lady Sophia down to make her curtsy to the assembled guests before the nursery hour. Cassandra stood at the edge of the great drawing-room, Sophia's hand tight in hers, and watched the Earl of Rothermere turn from his conversation with the Dowager Duchess and look directly at her, and watched, with a kind of falling, sickening clarity, the exact moment recognition dawned in his cold, pale eyes. He said nothing. Not then. He merely inclined his head with perfect, chilling courtesy. "Miss Wren, is it? How very unusual," and let the silence after her name do the rest of his work for him. She did not sleep again that night, certain the morning would bring exposure, dismissal, ruin. It brought, instead, something worse. A note, unsigned, slipped beneath her chamber door before dawn. "I know precisely who you are, Miss Wren, and precisely what you are not entitled to. You will present yourself in the West Gallery at 11 o'clock, or I shall present the truth of your parentage to His Grace's mother over the breakfast table, and let us see how long your position and your reputation survive it." She went, of course. She had no choice at all. The Earl of Rothermere received her in the West Gallery, beneath a row of Ashworth ancestors whose painted eyes seemed to Cassandra to watch the whole cruel interview with weary disapproval. "Lady Cassandra Voss," he said, using deliberately the name that had been legally stripped from her family the day her father's title was forfeit. "Or should I say Wren, since that is apparently the fiction you have chosen to hide behind. Did you truly believe you could install yourself in this house, beneath this roof, without my learning of it?" "I sought a position, my lord, nothing more. I have made no claims, spoken no falsehoods." "You have lived 11 years beneath a lie." His voice was pleasant, almost gentle, which made it so much worse. "Your father was a debtor and a fool who lost Wren House fairly, at cards and at law, and if you imagine some romantic tale of stolen documents and family conspiracy, I would remind you that grief makes fools of us all. I have no wish to see you further ruined, Miss Wren. I am not without compassion. But you will leave Ravenscliffe within the week, quietly, without explanation to His Grace or his mother, or I promise you the whole sordid history of your father's disgrace will be the topic of every drawing-room from here to London by Michaelmas. And I dare say it will not reflect kindly upon the Duke's judgment either, in the governess he has chosen for his ward." It was, Cassandra understood with cold clarity, not merely a threat to her. It was a threat to Alexander, and to Sophia, and to everything she had, against all sense, allowed herself to want in this house. "I will consider it," she said, because she could think of nothing else to say, and fled the gallery with her eyes stinging and her hands like ice. She did not see because she did not think to look, the housekeeper's door standing very slightly ajar at the gallery's far end, nor Mrs. Whitfield's white, stricken face withdrawing swiftly from the gap. It was that same evening, in the depths of a house lit gold and noisy with the party's third night of entertainments, that everything Cassandra thought she understood was overturned entirely. A commotion in the servants' hall drew half the household running. A soldier, gaunt and fever-bright and barely able to stand, had staggered up the drive on foot, having walked the last 6 miles from the mail coach's final stop after a journey of nearly 2 years. He was filthy, wasted, and delirious with fever, and it was only when Mrs. Whitfield, white-faced, knelt beside him in the flagstoned hall and gasped his name that Cassandra, arriving at a run with her heart in her throat, understood. "Edmund," she whispered, and the soldier's fever-glazed eyes found her face and recognized her, and he said, in a broken, wondering voice, "Cassie, I thought you dead. I thought us both quite finished. Her brother, presumed lost at Salamanca 3 years past, mourned, buried in absence, alive, and here and delivered to the one house in England where the truth of both their ruined names hung by the thinnest of threads. Dr. Bellamy was sent for at once. The Duke himself, drawn by the commotion, arrived to find Cassandra on her knees on the cold flagstones with a dying soldier's head in her lap, weeping in a manner entirely unbefitting a governess, and understood. Watching her face, watching the word brother fall from her lips, watching 11 years of carefully constructed fiction collapse in a single flagstoned hallway. That Miss Cassandra Wren was not remotely who she had claimed to be. Cassandra. His voice was very quiet. What is your brother's name? She looked up at him, tears streaking her face, and could lie no longer. Edmund Voss, she whispered. My name is Cassandra Voss. My father was the Earl of Rothmere, before your guest stole his title and his name from him with forged papers, and destroyed him utterly. And I have lived 11 years pretending to be no one at all, so that no one would ever learn what became of the family your own father tried and failed to save. The Duke of Ashworth said nothing at all for a very long moment, and in the silence, Cassandra watched every hope she had allowed herself these past weeks crumble to ash. For what could a duke's regard mean now to the disgraced, penniless, doubly disinherited daughter of a broken house? Then he said, low and urgent, "Get your brother to the Blue Chamber quietly, and send for Bellamy directly. And say nothing more to anyone until I have had time to think, because I begin to believe, Cassandra, that my father spent the last years of his life trying to prove exactly what you have just told me, and died before he could finish it. It was not rejection. It was something Cassandra had not dared hope for at all. An ally. Share this if you know someone who's still waiting for an old wrong to be set right. You know who." Edmund's fever broke on the second day, though it left him weak as a child and haunted in his sleep by the retreat from Salamanca. Cassandra sat with him in stolen hours between the schoolroom and the increasingly strained business of avoiding the Earl of Rothmere's eye across the dinner table, and it was on the third such morning, reaching for her workbox to fetch a fresh needle, that she discovered the false lining slit clean through and the bundle of letters gone entirely. Her blood went to ice. She found Alice, the young housemaid who tended the nursery wing, weeping in the linen closet before the noon hour was out. And the whole miserable truth came tumbling from her in a rush of guilt and terror. The Earl's own valet had approached her 3 days past with a guinea, more money than Alice earned in half a year, and instructions only to search Miss Wren's chamber for any old letters tied with ribbon, nothing more, and bring them directly to him. "I didn't know what they were, miss. I swear it on my mother's grave. I thought it were nothing, love letters or some such. I never thought—" Cassandra could not, in the end, find it in herself to be angry at a girl of 17 offered a guinea against a lifetime of £6 a year. But the loss was catastrophic regardless. The only proof, however fragmentary, that the forgery her father had died protesting might, in fact, have been real, was now in the hands of the very man with the greatest cause on earth to see it destroyed. She went to the Duke with the news within the hour, finding him in the study with the door, for once, shut fast against the noise of his mother's house party below. "He will burn them," Cassandra said, hardly able to keep the despair from her voice. "Tonight, most likely. Why would he wait? Every hour he holds them is an hour of risk to himself. Then we have perhaps until tonight to stop him." Alexander, she could not, even now, quite make herself think of him as his grace, was already reaching for his coat. "Cassandra, there is something I have not yet told you, because I only confirmed it myself 2 days past, and I did not wish to raise a hope I could not yet promise to keep. My father did not merely suspect the Rothmere forgery. He believed he had found the proof of it. A second copy of the original, genuine deed, lodged for safekeeping with the parish before your father's ruin was complete. He never recovered it before his death, but I believe I know exactly where he meant to look. Where? The parish church at Ravenscombe. Reverend Ashford has held the living there for 30 years. If any record survives, it will be in his keeping. They rode out together the following dawn. Cassandra, Alexander, and, insisting despite Dr. Bellamy's protests, a still pale but stubbornly upright Edmund, who declared he had not survived 2 years of French prison camps to be left behind for a country ride. Reverend Ashford proved to be a small, precise, kindly man of perhaps 60, who listened to their halting explanation with an expression of dawning, grieved recognition. "Voss," he murmured when Cassandra gave her true name at last. "Good heavens, Lady Cassandra. I baptized you myself, child, at Wren House Chapel, though you'll not remember it. You were a fortnight old." He rose, moving with sudden urgency to a locked cabinet behind the vestry altar. "Your father came to me himself, not 4 months before his ruin was made complete. He was afraid. He told me the Voss claim to the succession rested upon a deed he believed forged, and he asked me to hold a copy of the true instrument in trust, for safekeeping, until such time as it might be needed. I have kept it 30 years, wondering if that time would ever come." The document he drew forth, yellowed, sealed, witnessed by 2 names Cassandra did not recognize, but Alexander did, with a sharp, indrawn breath, as former tenants of the Ashworth estate. Set out in plain, unambiguous law, the true boundary and succession of the Rothmere title, utterly incompatible with the forged instrument that had stripped her father of everything he owned. "It is genuine," Alexander said low, reading it through twice with a scholar's care. "God help us, Cassandra, it is entirely genuine. Rothmere's claim, Julian Voss's claim to the title itself, was never lawful at all. Your father was the rightful earl until the day he died, and by rights of succession, Edmund—" He turned, and the look he gave her stricken, silent brother was almost reverent. "Edmund is Earl of Rothmere now, and has been these 3 years past, whether any soul in England knew it or not." Edmund, white-faced, sat down rather suddenly upon the vestry bench. "And the stolen letters?" Cassandra asked when she could trust her voice again. "If Rothmere destroys them tonight—" "Then he destroys corroborating evidence only," Alexander said grimly. "Not the proof itself. We have that now, in our own hands. Reverend Ashford, will you come to Ravenscliffe tonight and bring this with you?" The old priest's eyes were bright. "I have waited 30 years to see this wrong righted, Your Grace. I would not miss it for the world." The final night of the house party had been meant by the Dowager Duchess's careful design to culminate in the announcement of an alliance. The Duke of Ashworth's hand all but promised, by county gossip, if not yet by formal word, to Miss Voss, the Earl of Rothmere's ward, before the assembled cream of Yorkshire society. It culminated instead in something Yorkshire society would speak of for a generation. Alexander led Cassandra onto the floor for the first dance of the evening, a breach of propriety so glaring, governess and duke together before 300 witnesses, that a ripple of scandalized whispers followed them the length of the ballroom. The Dowager Duchess went white behind her fan. The Earl of Rothmere's face, watching from beside the punch table, contorted through surprise into something colder and far more dangerous. "You are ruining me quite thoroughly, Your Grace," Cassandra murmured as they turned together beneath the great chandelier. "I am ruining nothing," Alexander said, "that was not built upon a lie in the first place. Trust me a little longer, my love. It will be worth the scandal." When the dance ended, he did not release her hand. Instead, with the whole ballroom's attention already fixed upon them, he raised his voice to carry to every corner of the room. "Before this evening proceeds further," he said, "I find I have a matter of grave importance to lay before my guests, and before the Earl of Rothmere in particular." The musicians faltered into silence. 300 faces turned as one. Reverend Ashford stepped forward from the doorway where he had waited, the sealed deed in his hands, and Mrs. Whitfield beside him, for the housekeeper, it transpired, had served at Wren House herself 30 years past. In the year of the elder Earl's ruin, and had recognized both the forged instrument and the truth of it from the very first day Cassandra's name had crossed her threshold. She stepped forward now and spoke, in a clear, steady voice that shook only slightly, of what she had witnessed as a girl of 20 in Wren House's steward's office. Julian Voss's own hand altering a boundary deed by candlelight, believing himself unobserved. The colour drained entirely from the Earl of Rothmere's face as Reverend Ashford laid the true witness deed upon the card table before the assembled company, and Alexander, in a voice that carried the full weight of his rank and his fury both, declared the matter one for the magistrate and for Chancery, and named before 300 witnesses the true and rightful Earl of Rothmere. Not Julian Voss, but the gaunt, quietly upright young soldier standing at Cassandra's side. "You cannot prove," Rothmere began, too loudly, too late. "I believe," Alexander said, "we just have." The Earl of Rothmere left Ravenscliffe within the hour, under circumstances that would end within the 12-month, in a chancery ruling that stripped him of the title and estate he had held 11 years by fraud, and in a magistrate's inquiry that saw him quit England altogether rather than face the assizes. "I want to know, what would you risk everything for if it meant finally being seen as who you really are? One thing. Tell me in the comments." They were married the following May in the small stone church at Ravenscombe, where Cassandra had been baptized a countess's daughter and buried for 11 years beneath a governess's plain grey wool. She stood at the altar not as Miss Wren, and not merely as Lady Cassandra Voss restored, for her brother's chancery victory had seen the family name and honour returned entire, but as herself fully and finally in a gown the colour of new leaves, with her brother Edmund, Earl of Rothmere, once more and steadily regaining his strength to give her away, and Sophia, delighted beyond all bearing at gaining a mother she had chosen for herself months before her father had dared propose. Scattering hawthorn blossom down the aisle. The Dowager Duchess, who had raged for a full month after the scandal of that ballroom revelation, and then, upon meeting Cassandra's brother, the new Earl, and discovering him possessed of both fortune and excellent manners, had performed a reversal so complete and so sudden that Alexander teased his mother about it for the rest of her days, wept happily through the entire ceremony from the front pew. Mrs. Whitfield stood near the back with Alice, forgiven her small betrayal, kept on in service and grown wiser for it, both women dabbing determinedly at their eyes. Reverend Ashford performed the ceremony himself, his voice unsteady with 30 years of waiting, finally come to their end. "I once told you," Alexander murmured low, as they walked back down the aisle together as man and wife, sunlight spilling gold through the ancient church door, "that I had become unconcerned with what was proper. I recall it distinctly, Your Grace. I find," he said, "that I have never in my life been more glad of my own impropriety." Outside, the Yorkshire moor stretched green and endless beneath a clean spring sky. And Cassandra Hale, Duchess of Ashworth, no longer hiding, no longer afraid, no longer anyone's secret at all, laughed for the sheer, astonished joy of it, and let her husband lead her home. If you fell in love with Cassandra and Alexander's story, please consider leaving a rating or review. It helps enormously and lets me know which stories to bring you next. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Watch next. There's another Ravenscliffe story waiting. Comment and tell me which moment got you. Share with the one friend who'd fall for this too. Thank you for reading, and see you in Yorkshire again soon.